Hello everyone, Helen here. How are you doing? I hope you're okay. So thanks for joining me today, and a big welcome if you're new. And hope you're going to enjoy the variety of things that I like to share with you, which sometimes are crafty things. You can see I'm in my craft room today, and sometimes I go out travelling. And if you're with me last week, you'll have seen or come along on our last camper van trip. But I came back and had a day at home, and then I went off again. So I thought that you might like to join me on that little holiday as well. And then I will be back next week with a bit of a crafty update. But for today, come along with my mum and I, because I went away with my mum on a really nice break that we had. So I've been going away on holiday with my mum for quite a lot of years now. But well, you won't be surprised. I don't even need to explain why we didn't go away in 2020 or 2021. So we were really determined to get our little holiday in this year. And whenever my mum and I decide where we'd like to go, we have to think about how to get there by public transport, because I've never learnt to drive. And although my mum absolutely loves driving, she had to give up her car about 10 years ago, I think it was, and because she just couldn't afford to run it any longer. So, but being the determined character that she is, she wasn't going to let that stop her from going to the places that she loves. So she became what we affectionately call in our family a busball, because she, in no time at all, she seemed to know every single bus timetable and bus route in the area. So she just gets everywhere by bus. So it's really impressive. So one of my mum's favourite places in the whole world is the English Lake District. And she decided that's where we should go. So I thought, right, well, if you can sort out the bus times and everything, then, and I sorted out somewhere for us to stay. And so she did that. She decided, after researching it and researching where the guest house was that we were going to stay in, that it would be better to get 3 buses to where we were going rather than just 2, because if we got the third one would stop right outside where we were staying. So it meant we didn't have really much of a walk with all of our luggage and things. So that's what she did. And she typed out this little bus plan, journey plan for us. She did a copy for me and a copy for her. So we knew exactly what we were doing. We had to meet up in Newcastle because we don't live in the same place, and then started our journey from there. So we caught the bus to Carlisle, first of all, from Newcastle. Then we had another bus to Penrith, and then the final bus to Keswick. And we'd each set off from home at about 9 o'clock. I'd caught a train from Durham to Newcastle, and we didn't arrive at the guest house in Keswick until 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was a long day of travelling. But we were perfectly happy with this, because not only did it feel like we were taking part in some kind of challenge, the journey also gave us lots of time to chat and spend time in each other's company. So it was fine. It was actually the first time that I'd been on a bus since February 2020. So I did feel rather anxious at first, though the buses were well ventilated and not very busy. But my anxiety definitely went away and turned to anger when we arrived at Carlisle bus station. After a journey of 2 hours and 20 minutes, we found that there were no public toilets there, or even close by. We had to walk to a shopping centre with our luggage and go into the nearest cafe, which caused us to miss the next bus. This really isn't the ideal situation for anyone, especially my mum, who's nearly 87 and not quite as agile as she used to be. And when we need the toilet, we need the toilet. Anyway, the rest of the journey went by smoothly. We were pleased to find that there were toilets at Penrith bus station, and we were happy to arrive at our accommodation in Keswick, a place called Ravensworth House. We had a very nice room, and it had a partial view of the mountains, and it was excellently positioned for getting out and about during our stay. That evening we went out and had fish and chips for our evening meal, and I can definitely recommend eating here if you're ever in Keswick. On our first full day, we decided to stay in Keswick, and we began with breakfast at a nice little cafe across the road from the guest house. The guest house didn't do breakfasts. We then had a lovely morning shopping. One of our favourites is the Hurdy shop, whose products are based around the Herdwick sheep, which is commonly found in the Lake District. They do all sorts of products, from Hurdy wool throws and yarn, in fact, and toy Herdwick sheep, hot water bottle covers, kitchenware, and all sorts of other bits and bobs, and all bearing their distinctive Hurdy pictures. We passed by a lovely little florist. We didn't go into it, but I just thought it had a really attractive display. And we came across a yarn shop, and we did take a quick look inside, although I think the owner was definitely suffering from a severe lack of space for her stock. We had such a nice time in the Peter Rabbit and Friends shop. Although I'm not such a fan of Beatrix Potter's writing, I love her artwork and all the characters that she created. And I'll show you later what I bought while I was in there looking at all the beautiful things. Well, at this point, after a bit of lunch, my mum had definitely run out of steam, so she decided to go back to the guest house for a bit of a rest, and I went off to the Derwent Pencil Museum. I'd been here once before, about 20 years ago, when my two children were young, but I was really looking forward to revisiting without small children. The Keswick Pencil Factory opened in 1832, and it first produced coloured pencils in 1916. The museum stands on the site of the original factory, which suffered terribly in 2015 when the river burst its banks during Storm Desmond, and many precious artefacts were damaged or even lost completely. However, the museum today is really well worth a visit. It's surprising how much there is to learn about pencils. The exhibition tells you about the history of graphite mining in the Keswick area, which began in the early 1500s, as well as how pencils were made, and there's a couple of machines on display that were used for cutting grooves into the wooden rods and for painting the outside of the pencils. I saw a very long pencil, which at one time was in the Guinness Book of Records for being the longest coloured pencil in the world. Well, there are longer ones now. And I learnt about the special pencils made at the factory during the Second World War that contained tightly rolled up maps in the centre that were given to airmen that were flying over enemy lands. And these maps were printed onto tissue paper. I also learnt some interesting random facts about pencils. For example, that the average pencil can only be sharpened 17 times. As you would expect, the museum has a shop, and I had a nice time browsing, but I was very self-controlled and I only came away with 2 erasers, even though I was so tempted by the shiny new sets of coloured pencils. On my way back to the guest house, I called in at another shop, Ye Old Friars. It's a chocolatier and sweet shop, and it's been in the same family for nearly 100 years. And it's worth going in, if only to look at the fine array of sweets and chocolates. Unlike in the Pencil Museum shop, I just couldn't resist buying 1 or 2 sweet treats while I was in there. I returned to the guest house, and a little later my mum and I had a really excellent meal at an Italian restaurant called Casabella. We were the first ones in when it opened, and this is why it looks rather empty. It very soon filled up. And my mum celebrated her first holiday for 3 years with a pink gin. For our second full day, we decided to visit a couple of our favourite places in the Lake District. The weather wasn't great that day. We had an awful lot of rain, but we'd gone prepared, knowing well what the weather in the Lake District can be like. So we caught a bus from Keswick to Grasmere. I didn't get great views of the beautiful scenery because of the rain lashing down. And on arrival, we went straight to Heidi's Cafe to have brunch. The cafe was nicely decorated inside in readiness for Halloween. The service was a bit slow, but the food was good when it came. If you're familiar with the English Lake District, you'll know that the distinctive character of the region is partly down to the fact that many homes and buildings are made of local slate, with grey being the predominant colour in whichever Lake District village or town you visit, and Grasmere is no exception. My mum and I headed through the village to the place which is an essential stopping place for all visitors to Grasmere, the Grasmere gingerbread shop. Grasmere gingerbread was invented by an amazing lady called Sarah Nelson in 1854, and she has a fascinating life story which I haven't got time to tell you at the moment. The tiny shop which we visited was once the village school, which was opened in 1630, and it was in use for nearly 220 years, until it became the cottage where Sarah Nelson lived. She created her gingerbread at a time when tourists were able to visit the Lake District more easily due to the coming of the railways. And she produced her gingerbread for the next 50 years, and right until she died at the age of 88 in 1904. Her recipe has always remained a secret. Sarah herself stored the recipe in a local bank vault, and there really is nothing quite like Grasmere gingerbread. It's a kind of cross between a biscuit and a cake, and it is extremely delicious. We never visit Grasmere without going into the shop and buying a few packs of gingerbread to take home with us to share with our family. It's baked freshly every day and it smells divine. I couldn't help pausing as we walked past the back of the bakery. Oh, the smell's just gorgeous. Just behind the shop is the church and the graveyard where the poet William Wordsworth is buried, so we paid a little visit to the graves of William and his family. William moved to Dove Cottage in Grasmere in 1799 when he was 29, and it was here that he wrote many of his most famous poems. We had a little stroll about after that, in the rain, my mum looking up at the mountains and reminiscing about the days when she was able to go hiking on the fells. We've got so many happy memories of family visits to the area. Oh, well, the rain became heavier and heavier though, so before we got back on the bus, we stopped at a cafe and art gallery for a comforting hot chocolate, and then we waited at the bus stop in the rain for our next bus. We had a very rainy ride to Windermere, and we still couldn't really see much of the view to the mountains and the lakes that we were passing by. Our main reason for visiting Windermere was to go to the flagship Lakeland store. It's a company that began in Windermere in 1964, selling only plastic bags. And my mum is very proud that she's been a loyal customer ever since those very earliest days. It wasn't long before the Lakeland stores started opening stores around the UK and selling all sorts of kitchenware and cooking equipment and home storage and lots more besides. We headed straight for the cafe where we had a delicious lunch of a sizzlingly hot cheese soufflé. It was absolutely scrumptious, followed by an equally enjoyable mini pavlova. We then had a wonderful hour or so browsing in the store. We were especially attracted by all of the Christmas things that were displayed rather temptingly. There were decorations and crackers and some rather lovely Christmas tableware. Lots of nice tins of biscuits and things, and so much more. I had gone with a little shopping list, though I didn't actually have Christmas things on my list. But it was great to see them, and I did actually order a few things online when I got home. We popped into the local supermarket, Booths, to buy ourselves a little bite to eat later, and then we got back on the bus to return to Keswick. We spent our final day just staying in Keswick. At the start of the day, we actually had sunshine, so we decided to go for a walk in the nearby Fitz Park. Fitz actually comes from an Old Norse word meaning river meadow, and for centuries the lower park was actually a water meadow where sheep and cattle grazed. The park was officially opened in 1887, and the first public event was the celebration of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee in that same year. We enjoyed the sunshine while it lasted, and it was mild enough to sit outside in the little cafe in the park, which, like the cafe we'd been in the day before, was decorated for Halloween, and we sat there with our cups of tea. We were just finishing when the rain started to fall again, so we headed for the Keswick Museum, which is situated within the park. I learned all sorts of things while we wandered around. The poet Robert Southey had once lived in Keswick, and I learnt that he'd written the original tale of the Three Bears. A local lady called Eliza Linton, who was born in 1822, was very unusual for those days. She went off to London to work as a journalist. I was quite intrigued to learn that she campaigned against women getting the vote. There was an excellent information point where a projector took us through the geology of the local area, which had some fascinating special effects to try and explain all the changes that have taken place over millions of years, explaining why there are so many mountains and lakes in the Lake District. But my favourite thing in the museum was the lithophone, an instrument that's made of stones called hornfells, which are found on the nearby mountain of Skiddaw, and which were discovered in the 19th century to have musical properties. A local mason called Joseph Richardson took many years to collect and tune enough stone to create this huge instrument, and he also added some metal bars and some metal bells. And he then toured Britain and abroad giving concerts on this instrument. Apparently he even gave a concert for Queen Victoria, who said, "I enjoyed the performance, but maybe without the bells." My mum and I both enjoyed having a go at playing this amazing instrument, though we probably needed a bit more practice before we were concert standard. I did also enjoy this floor map of the Lake District and tracing where we'd been during our stay, including our trip to Grasmere and Windermere. Walked back through the rainy park and crossed the River Brita. This river is only 8 kilometres or about 5 miles long, but it's very prone to flooding because it's fed by a very large catchment area. When Storm Desmond struck in 2015, the whole of Fitz Park was under water and silt and debris, and it caused a huge amount of damage. We'd read good reports about the youth hostel cafe, so we decided to go there for our lunch, and we weren't disappointed. The food was good, very reasonably priced, with a quick service, and there was also a nice view across the river to the mountains. The rain continued to pour down, so my mum returned to the guest house while I went on part of a tree walk. I'd picked up a leaflet for it in the cafe in the park. There was a selection of the trees in the park were numbered with yellow labels, and the leaflet gave a little bit of information about each one. I came across one tree that was completely new to me. Well, I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it before, a holm oak, which is an evergreen species of oak, which was brought to Britain about 400 years ago from the Mediterranean. I did enjoy the walk, but I would have preferred not to do it in such persistent rain. And even my camera started to object and no longer wanted to focus on anything. So I abandoned the walk before I'd finished and returned to the guest house to dry off. Well, I didn't do any videoing on the next day because we were just on the buses again, heading for home. And we did have a pretty smooth journey, which was a bit quicker. We didn't miss buses anywhere, and so my mum and I got to Newcastle and parted ways, and I got the bus back to Durham. My family really enjoyed the Grasmere gingerbread that I brought back. It really didn't last very long. And I thought I'd show you here how it's always wrapped in a kind of baking parchment and fastened with an elastic band. That's the way it's been sold. It's probably been sold like that for years. I imagine it might have had string around it originally. I said I would show you what I bought in the Peter Rabbit and Friends shop. So here are the things that I bought. I bought a towel for the kitchen with Peter Rabbit running along and a few little carrots. It's a kind of just a hand towel to have in the kitchen. So that's really nice. I bought a couple of little Peter Rabbit Christmas ornaments for the Christmas tree. So when I look at those, I'll remember that lovely visit that we had. And then I also couldn't resist this little miniature stope, I think this glass thing is called, with a little scene in it of Mrs. Rabbit with her little rabbit family. So I'm going to treasure that as well, put it with all my little things on the shelf over there in the craft room. And also when I was in the museum shop, Keswick Museum, I came across this little book which is called Peter Rabbit's Other Tale. And I was really delighted when I opened it and found that it is the Peter Rabbit story, but it's written in verse. And it has it's been written by Canon Hardwick Rawnsley, who is a friend of the Potter family, and he used some of the Beatrix Potter's original drawings, but then rewrote the story of Peter Rabbit in verse. So yeah, I thought I'd read you the start of it. You'll see why I just love this so much. It's exactly my kind of thing. There were 4 little bunnies, no bunnies were sweeter, Mopsy and Cottontail, Flopsy and Peter. They lived in a sandbank, as here you may see, at the foot of a fir, a magnificent tree. Now, my dears, said the old Mrs. Rabbit one day, you may run to the fields or the lane for your play, but I warn you all 4 to be sure not to go to Mr. McGregor's, who lives just below. So I hope you enjoyed visiting the Lake District with me, and yeah, I think I'm going to finish here for today, but I will see you again very soon, and until then, take good care of yourself, keep nice and busy, and I'll be back soon. Okay, bye.